Alright, episode 49 of the Planet Zoo Experience, and today we have a double feature to round off the last episode of the year, and that is the Dhole and the Dingo. Now, before I get too far into it, obviously I had forgotten to hit the start button on my screen recording, so oops. But what we're going to be doing here is we are going to make a separation straight down the middle, and on the left side we're going to have the Dingo, and on the right side the Dhole. This way it has somewhat of a connected look while still being safely separated because these two animals do not get along, or wouldn't get along, I should say. So since we have a two-part, let's jump in right off the bat. We're going to talk about the Dhole first. When it comes to the Dhole, the scientific name of the Dhole, it is the Quan alpinus. There's another way I could say it, but I started laughing, and I'm going to stick with alpinus, which is ancient Greek for dog and the Latin word for alpine. As for its given name, it's actually not quite known where it comes from. I've seen a lot of different attempts to really explain it, and at least to me, none of them really made much sense. The closest one I could find that makes some sense is the definition given by Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which comes from the Kannada language, which is in southwestern India, and the word that they use for it is tola, or wolf, in their language. I could see how tola can become dola, and then eventually just dhole. That is the closest I could find in a way that makes sense. As for the dingo, its scientific name is actually one of two, and we'll get into why that might be in just a second. And it is Canis familiaris, or the common dog, or Canis lupus dingo, which is dog, wolf, dingo. Very creative, I know. And the term dingo comes from the Darug word tinko, which means bitch. Now, when I say bitch, I mean the word for a female dog. So, it's not as bad, but I'm sure YouTube doesn't care. Now, as for the dhole, they can be found in India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Tibet, Xinjiang, Yunnan, Sichuan, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Sumatra, and Java. While the dingo only lives in the great island continent of Australia. And, man, if you think that they don't belong there compared to all the other weird shit, you don't know yet, but I'm gonna teach you. So, the dingo predates European settlement of the Australian island. Most likely, it came down from Indonesia during the time where the two were connected in the landmass known as Sahul. While the dhole really is just kind of where it's always been. We've talked about this time and time again. So many animals started out in Central Asia and eventually branched off, and that is the path of the dhole. They didn't go far, and they still managed to thrive as they do, even when surrounded by things like sloth bears and tigers. Interestingly, the dhole is actually seen as something called a reticulate evolutionary line, meaning two species broke off from one another, but were still close enough to interbreed, and eventually they had done that enough times to create a new species. So think of it, unlike the branches splitting off, eventually they came back together and formed its own branch. And this is something that has been very successful for them and has shown them to be very closely related to African painted dogs, but not close enough to also interbreed. It's a very interesting situation. And on top of that, it was also most likely a post-Pliocene descendant of the golden jackal. However, the earliest species was thought to have evolved in Europe, believe it or not. roughly 774,000 to 129,000 years ago. And fossils have been found all over the world. They were found in Iberia, Palawan, which is the islands in between Indonesia and the Philippines, Honshu, the main island of Japan, and one jawbone was even found in Nuevo Leon, Mexico, which brings a very strange thought of how extant was the dhole, truly. Either way, it's quite an interesting species once we start getting into the nitty-gritty. Now, the social structure of these animals is pretty similar to that of the painted dog. They will travel in packs, usually clans from 5 to 12, but at times have been known to reach numbers as high as 40. So if you want to make a massive dhole exhibit, you can. However, do keep in mind they do require a ton of land for a single individual. I believe it's over 1,000 square meters, which even the cheetah wasn't that bad, I think. Now, on the other hand, dingoes are actually mostly solitary. They attempt to stay on their own, however, have been known to create packs when the environment requires such a thing. And usually they'll be in a similar pack structure to that of what we consider wolves, where the two alphas, the father and mother, have their pups, and the pups stick around with the pack to aid in hunting and other survival reasons. As you can tell with the structure of the dhole, it's very similar but very different from the dingo. The dhole has that rusty red coat that they pretty much always will, with a very wide skull, comparatively speaking, and generally they are sort of a mix of the gray wolf and the red fox when it comes to body plan. On top of that, dholes don't howl or bark. They mostly whine, growl, similar to that of dogs, along with whistles, screams, and chattering. Meanwhile, the dingo is honestly kind of just like a normal dog with the way they act. Barks, yips, growls. What you expect of a dog. And I think this is the perfect time to really get into why one of the scientific terms is the common dog. And that is because there has been an absolute ton of interbreeding between feral dogs and dingoes. Now, this is done on accident, mostly because dogs are released into the wild, they meet with the native dingoes, they interbreed, and it has continued to the point where it's kind of a struggle in every aspect that has to do with the dingo, because when it comes to conservation, they want to protect the natural dingoes, the purebreds. However, they can't tell the difference between purebred and not purebred. And it's to the point where there's been a decent amount of poaching of dingoes that are an issue in society. And the farmer or hunter essentially just going, it was a half-breed. It was not a natural born or not a purebred dingo. And it really causes issues when it comes to conservation in this aspect, and with law, and with pretty much everything else. However, it is very important to make clear, these are not like domestic dogs. You can't tame these animals. They are wild, they are feral, and they can hurt you. As a matter of fact, even though the dingo will attempt to avoid human contact and try to keep distance, especially when it comes to conflict, because they are smart enough to realize that humans will hunt them and will kill them if they step out of line, they are able to harm you. Obviously, it's a dog. We've all heard stories of dogs attacking people. And with the dingo, the more aggressive ones are ones that have been fed by people, being mistaken for normal dogs. You shouldn't feed wild dogs anyway, but dingoes are even worse. On top of that, they are opportunistic hunters. We've all heard the meme and had a laugh at the, oh, a dingo ate my baby, but that has happened. If given the chance, a dingo will absolutely eat a baby human, or even, if there's a couple, they could take down a child. They probably could take down an adult, but they're most likely not even going to attempt to throw down with a fully grown adult human. And Dholes are not to be left out of this little tidbit of violence. Dholes are known culturally as extremely bloodthirsty. For instance, the earliest depiction of a dhole is of 3 of them chasing a spirit or woman up a tree that dated back to 100 BC in Bharut Stupa. After that, they were depicted as aggressive, bloodthirsty animals in Red Dog by Rudyard Kipling. And even in the modern day, they were a combative animal in the Far Cry series, Far Cry 4 and Far Cry Primal. And all the cultural influence I could find was how aggressive these animals are. I was very surprised. I figured, yes, a wild dog, of course, but at least with like wolves, they're also seen as being somewhat noble or something along those lines. I have found nothing like that for the dhole. And so hopefully I don't have to spell out that no, they are not domesticatable. They will not follow orders of any human being, even though in Far Cry Primal they said you could, and I feel betrayed. Let's wrap up my interesting facts about the dingo. I want to get into the dhole. First and foremost, when it comes to the dingo, to get a little bit further into this confusion of the purebred dingo's protection status, I wrote down this little tidbit. Hopefully it can shed some light. So while in some ways they are protected, there is a need for population control. For decades, people known as doggers would lay traps, poison baits, and good old-fashioned long-distance lead poisoning to deal with them. As a matter of fact, the only real difference with dealing with these animals, at least professionally, is the introduction of Poison 1080, which is known as Doggone, which... Australia, you're the best when it comes to giving nicknames to shit. It's just macas, thongs, doggone. You just don't give a shit, do you? And then back in the Wombat episode of fucking Fatso the Fat-Ass Wombat. Oh, I love it. So good. But anyway, overzealous killing in the past had led to purebred dingoes being considered a vulnerable species. However, as I said, with wild dogs, they're fair game. If they're interbred, it's completely fair. You can kill them legally. But again, with identification issues, it's led down a slippery slope of really harming the wild dingo population. Now, back over to the dhole, and we're going to wrap that bit up before the end of the video. So, starting with the conservation status, the reason that the dhole is endangered is for a few reasons that are pretty prevalent, that we've talked about many times. Habitat loss, human competition, and competition with other animals. Really, it's hard for them to keep making their way through, especially when they aren't quite as adaptable as something like the coyote that can steal from trash and other, ways to get by. But I feel that's a bigger shame than just the fact of it being endangered, because this is a very fascinating canine. As I've said earlier, they don't howl or bark. They make squeaks and chatters and whistles, which is already strange enough, but this animal gets even weirder. They, unlike all other canids, do not mark their territory with urine. I don't know how they do it. I couldn't find how they do it. But from what I can tell, they don't have a structured territory. They're just like, this kind of area is mine. Just stay out of the path of the other packs, and there's no big problem. But there's still one very strange part of their urination process that I just can't get over. We all know the cliche, dog lifts its leg to pee. Dholes are known to lift both back legs to pee. Now you may be thinking, oh, like left or right? No, both of them. Doing a handstand. Why? What evolutionary boon does pissing straight down by standing on your front legs do? It's not straight down. It's like... You know what? I'm thinking way too much about this. It's just blowing my mind. And on top of that, they got one other real confusing part of their toiletries, and that's the fact that they have a communal latrine. Yes, you heard that right. Dholes will pick out a part of their current territory and designate that as the poop box. It's not wild in like a why do they do that, because it's pretty sanitary, right? But it's more of a you're trying to tell me that Dholes, a wild dog from southern Asia, has communal latrines where every time I go to work, someone doesn't know how to shit in a toilet? Have we truly fallen so far? I'm mad. But anyway, stepping away from the bathroom habits of this wild dog, I have one last little bit of information about the dhole that I find very interesting. And that is the fact that they are on, or at least have been, depicted on the Russian ruble and the Kazakh tenge, which is very confusing because they're not native to there anymore. Like I said, they used to be, but not anymore. Oh well. But that is the end of my information. As you can see, the exhibit is kind of simple. Not overly simple, but not overly complex. And I feel like it would be a nice little section to really enjoy, being able to see the difference between these two animals that are very similar, but noticeably different in their appearance. So, with all that said and done, first and foremost, I hope you had a very fun and safe Christmas. And I hope to see you when I do my stream, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. American Eastern Standard Time. And if you would like to come see me, I will be raising money for my local zoo and game preserve. So feel free to throw a couple bucks at me. Even if you don't, I'll be giving them money anyway. And we're going to be doing some gaming, both in Planet Zoo and also an attempt see if maybe you guys are interested in something else that I might play. Civilization. I'm a big history nerd too. Or I can show you how I draw my thumbnails. We'll figure it out as we go, right? Right. Anyway, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, go outside, touch grass, drink water, hug your loved ones, and bye-bye.